The friendly fracas between Baylor and BYU is renewed this year, and an old friend of ours can make sure there's a ton of intrigue around that game. This is Locked On Baylor.
You are Locked On Baylor, your daily podcast on the Baylor Bears, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, Bears fans, and welcome to another episode of Locked On Baylor, brought to you by FanDuel. I'm your host, Cam Stewart of ESPN Central Texas and The Cam Show on Rogue Media Sports Network. We are churning right along in our Big 12 preseason previews for the teams that Baylor is going to face anyway. And today, we're talking about the friendly fracas. I'm just throwing that down. I am throwing it out there. I'm trying to make it happen like fetch. And that is Baylor versus BYU. They met, of course, in 21 and 22. That gets gets brought back this year. Renewed was the word I was looking for. Renewed this year, and there could be an old friend in on the fun. So we're going to talk about Gerry Bohanon and his chances at BYU, a lot of the turnover that these two teams have had, why Jake Hatch of Locked On Cougars is confident in BYU this year, and are both of these coaches on the hot seat? The answer might surprise you, but that is with my interview with Jake Hatch of Locked On Cougars right now. Jake Hatch, Locked On Cougars, talking about BYU today. The friendly fracas, which I think I have coined myself. I have not heard that before. It might have been slipped into my subconscious there somewhere. But Baylor and BYU in the friendly fracas renew a fairly new rivalry, if we can call it that, in the year 2024. Obviously played in non-conference 21 and 22. Now BYU in its second year in the Big 12. So, Jake, I have to ask first. I've asked my first couple guests, Utah and Colorado, how is the Big 12 treating you? How is a conference treating you guys?
I think overall BYU speaking generally is enjoying the Big 12. This is something that BYU aspired to be in for the 13 years they went independent. And that's the crazy thing about this is that they had a whole goal when they went independent in 2010 that to get where they're at today. So even though they went 5-7 a year ago and they had some struggles when it comes to football in particular, all things considered, the Cougars are very happy to be where they're at.
And I think it is mutual. From the conference, like everyone is now experiencing getting out to Provo, whether it be for football and the beautiful scenery and the unbelievable atmosphere in basketball, some great scenery in baseball as well, and all the other sports. But it has been so fun to have BYU in this conference. So I would say that is mutual. And now you mentioned coming off of disappointing, kind of an underwhelming season at 5-7, and the year before, after beating Baylor, number 10 Baylor at the time, in week 2, it looked like it was going to take off, and it didn't really get off the ground as well. So coming off that, what are the expectations for BYU coming into 2024?
I think the biggest thing for BYU this season to show that they're more competitive team. Remember, this was a team that started the season 5-2 a year ago. It felt inevitable at that point that they'd pick up a 6th win, maybe a 7th, and go bowling their first year in the Big 12. Well, as fate would have it, they lost 5 straight. They're on a 5-game losing streak coming into this season, and that's it's sad. It just has not sat well with anybody in the program. I was out at BYU with their photo day, which is a chance to catch up with players and coaches. And I'll say I did 5 or 6 interviews of different coaches and players at that. And every single one of them essentially referenced the 5-7 and how it just left a sour taste in their mouth. So yeah, the expectation this year is to get back to the postseason, whether that's 6-6 or anything beyond that. I think the biggest goal for BYU is to be bowl eligible this fall.
And 5-7 feels like the worst. You know what I mean? It's like just missing the NBA or NHL playoffs. It's like, well, what do we do now? I mean, it doesn't affect draft position, but
and the thing about it is they were in double overtime against Oklahoma State on the final weekend of the season.
Yeah.
And had they pulled that out, they're 6-6. So yeah, it is stuck with them all off season long.
But I think that was like a sacrificial lamb to a certain extent for the rest of the Big 12. I know you knew what was at stake. We were all watching, and it was like painful because I have nothing against BYU. And I'm like, I need them to lose. I can't have a Texas OU championship game to end this thing. So it was like you waited 13 years to get in the conference. You give this sacrifice. It should all be gravy from now on. At least it's what we're hoping for the BYU faithful. One thing I do want to mention, kind of on the negative side, unfortunately, is Baylor could not run the ball last year.
Mhm.
And when I kept looking, I was like, thank God for BYU, because they also can't run the ball. And it's just us at the bottom, 50 feet of crap, and then us at 50 or 13 and 14. And so I'm wondering, was there any thought to bringing Jeff Grimes back? He was a fan favorite, it seemed. I don't know if it was always that way with he and Kalani Sitake at the end there, but a guy who obviously really knows about running the football, relieved of his duties at Baylor. Was there any thought that from the fans, like, hey, we should bring this Grimes guy back?
No, there absolutely was. I can tell you, having talked with people who very much are in the mix on that, there were conversations held with Jeff Grimes of potential return to BYU. Now, the return to BYU would have been essentially as a run game coordinator, offensive line coach. And Jeff has been an offensive coordinator at BYU and also at Baylor. So he considers himself of a certain stature. And when the opportunity came to go to Kansas and be the OC, well, I think that made the decision for him to go join Lance Leipold. But they absolutely did explore that. I think they ended up in a good spot, landing TJ Woods, a guy that Kalani Sitake knows very well as their offensive line coach and also run game coordinator. And you're right, the rushing attack last year, it was pathetic, to use the best term I can come up with. And the hope is this year, with a better coached offensive line, a bigger stable of running backs that seem to be a little bit healthier, the hope is that BYU be a little bit better at rushing the football this fall.
Yeah. So was it something rushing wise and really offensively in general that kind of fell apart? Because I think about Baylor's season, and we were expecting to be a good rushing team, bringing some good guys back like Richard Reese, bringing in a Dominic Richardson. And I don't have all the answers for why they were so terrible running the ball. They didn't have a good offensive line, and they were typically playing from behind. That takes up a lot of the answer, but not all of it. So I'm wondering, for BYU, was it something that, an injury or something that just wasn't clicking early in the season? You were like, ooh, this could be a long season for this offense.
The O-line just was not in sync. I'm telling you, I watched, every single game, and I could tell you probably 90% of the plays, 4 offensive linemen would do the right thing, 1 would not, and it would scuttle everything they were trying to do. And that's the tough part, is you need to have everybody working in concert. Now, I also don't absolve the running backs, the quarterback from that, but the O-line in so many ways, just, and to use the term dysfunction is probably too strong of a term, but they weren't in sync at all. And that obviously cost Daryl Funk, the offensive line coach, last year his job. They completely changed out that. And the hope is, with a better, cohesive unit on the front there on the offensive line and some veteran players returning, that BYU will be better this year. And so far through training camp, it looks that way. But ultimately, the ultimate judge is we're going to be on the field this fall.
Tough to replace those Barringtons.
Well, Hey, Clark, who I'm sure you got to know, and Campbell, obviously his younger brother. I actually had Clark as when NIL first started up. He's actually a good friend of a friend of mine, funny enough, just a random connection. I had him on every week throughout what was his second to last season. He spent his final season there at Baylor, but he was a weekly guest of mine on Locked On Cougars, and I got a soft spot for the Barrington family. There's no doubt.
Wow, I didn't even know that, man. I wish I could pull off something like that. That'd be pretty cool. But yeah, we love, it wasn't a good year for the offensive line. So we love the leadership they brought, and all the coaches raved about them. So hoping it's a little bit better for Clark this year. Today's episode of Locked On Baylor is brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. You love sports. I love sports. Jake loves sports. And the sports are not sporting right now. We are desperately waiting for the sports to get sporting. But until then, FanDuel has me covered. Lets me keep the sports going whenever I want. All I got to do, open the app, dream up any bets anytime I'm in the mood. And this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone, every day, all summer long. So head over to FanDuel.com and start making the most of your summer. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. One more time, that is FanDuel.com. The guy that the BYU Cougars will be protecting is someone we also know very well here at Baylor. Let me know, I'll just keep it open-ended. What are your thoughts on Gerry Bohanon heading into the season?
Well, Gary's got a lot to prove. That's the thing about this. He was brought in to be kind of the foil to Jake Retzloff, who was kind of the incumbent guy coming into this year. But BYU wanted to challenge Jake, and Gerry was a guy that was out there in the transfer portal, has not played football in 2 years now, had that shoulder injury that he picked up at USF. And through spring ball, I'll just say this. It was not looking like, okay, this is a shadow of what Gerry Bohanon was. But He got healthy over the summer. I talked to people around BYU's program that said, hey, Jake, his shoulder's back to 100%. He's really starting to let it rip in terms of his throws down the field. And so far in training camp, we've only seen snapshots. We see about 20 minutes of practice. It's about a 2-hour practice every day. So it's a snapshot. But what I've seen from Gerry Bohanon so far in a BYU uniform is he looks more like the Gerry Bohanon that Baylor fans would recognize. He's still got the ability to scramble, still got the ability to throw the ball down the field when called upon. And we'll see if he can win the job. But yeah, he is looking more like the Gerry Bohanon that led Baylor to a Sugar Bowl, obviously, than the Gerry Bohanon that looked absolutely neutered when he was there in Tampa.
And that's awesome to hear. We all have a soft spot for Gerry, especially that 21 season. And you guys got to see him in that 21 season in a very entertaining game against BYU, which some kid named Puka Nakua stole the show, and we had no idea what we were in for. But you've seen Gerry when he's at his best there, and if he gets some time on the field and he's injury free, what does he add to this BYU offense?
Getting them the QB run game mainly back in their offense. Last year with Keaton Slovis, he was an okay athlete, but BYU's success with Zach Wilson and Jaron Hall, they had really good arms with the ability to attack all levels of the field, but they also had the scramble ability to add the QB run element to BYU's offense. Without that a year ago, it was crippling in many respects. I talked about how I thought the offensive line failed that run game. Well, I'm telling you, the lack of a QB run attack also hurt them in terms of their overall prowess on offense a year ago. That's what Gerry Bohanon will bring. Jake Retzloff has also got that ability to scramble. So, yeah, the one thing I think is that QB run element. But the other thing about Gerry is any Baylor fan who watched him, this is a guy that can move the ball down the field with his arm. He shows a very deft touch on deep balls. And Aaron Roderick, one of the hallmarks of Aaron Roderick's offense in Provo, is he likes to uncork deep shots. He'll run 3 times at you, and then as soon as you feel like you've softened up, he'll toss one deep. And that's what Gerry Bohanon brings to the table.
And something within that too, which I noticed in his really 1 year starting at Baylor, which is his 4th year on campus, by the way. That was 3 years ago, Jake. He makes great decisions, which seems like, that should be the starter for any quarterback, right? But especially a dual threat guy, he ran in a wide zone offense where he had to make a lot of the decisions running the ball, and he was really protective when throwing it. He had some bad picks kind of late on in the season, but for the most part, he made great decisions with the football. So hoping as a Baylor fan that he will at least find some time, if not the starting job out there. And you might have already mentioned this, but I do want to ask, like, what is the either part of the game or unit of the team, or maybe even a coach that you're like, this was a big part of our downfall last year, but I feel a lot more confident about that this year?
It's offensive line coach. I think Daryl Funk. It's nothing against Funk as a human being. I actually really enjoyed talking to him, but for whatever reason, the offensive line underperformed relative to expectations and their talent level, and he paid the price. Now, they also made another move at tight end, letting go of Steve Clark, who was a fan favorite and a really nice recruiter. But frankly, the tight end unit had kind of stagnated in terms of the progression of the guys in that unit. We're talking, they have, right now, 2 guys who are 4-star prospects at tight end, 3 that are 3 stars. And frankly, none of them under the previous coaching regime just were progressing to any level that you felt like, okay, they're going to be the next guy to take over for Isaac Rex, who was a 4-year starter for all intents and purposes. So they made those changes in that offensive unit. And I think that with TJ Woods, a veteran who's coached at the Power 4 and Power 5 level all over the country, most notably at Wisconsin and Oregon State, he's going to bring a new element to that offensive line. And then Kevin Gilbride, a longtime NFL assistant who's worked with some of the best receivers and tight ends in the NFL, he brings that element as well to the tight end unit. And the hope is that with those 2 coaching those units up, they will take a leap forward.
Now, having said that, we've talked about the struggle running the ball and with the offensive line. You just mentioned they basically replaced those 2 mindsets anyway, if not a coach, then at least a mindset. So is this a team that is going to want to play a little smash mouth?
Absolutely. It's one of the things Kalani Sitake has always enjoyed doing. He likes to run the football. They like to be considered a power run team. Now, they may do it from the shotgun where it's more of a spread look, but they will run it down your throat if you give them the opportunity. Tyler Algier, who's now with the Atlanta Falcons, was it 3 seasons ago, set the single-season rushing record for BYU. He was just an absolute battering ram and was unstoppable. So BYU's mentality is, we may look like a spread team, but we under everything that you see out there, the underlying theme is that they are a power run team who wants nothing more than to smash it down your throat.
Now, I want to get off course just a little bit here, and I want to ask about NIL because I think there are a lot of similarities between Baylor and BYU. Obviously, BYU a little bit bigger, but in a bigger alumni base, but both, religious affiliated schools that feel like the deck is stacked against them just a little bit when we got into the NIL space. And Baylor's starting to turn it around slowly but surely. So I'm wondering, how has NIL treated BYU across the board?
BYU approached NIL with a very open arms mindset when it first came about. Now, it has morphed, obviously, because now the guys are getting money left, right, and center. We know that Daquan Finn, for you guys down there, Baylor, he was a guy that cashed in to a big degree. BYU, I think, has aspirations of being a player when it comes to NIL, but doing it within reason. This is a university that's owned by the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Most of your listeners will know it as the Mormon Church, but the biggest thing is they I don't mean to sound crude, but they don't want to look ostentatious, I guess is probably the best term.
No, I get exactly what you're going for there. Yeah.
And they're going to spend some money. They have spent some money. The basketball program in particular, flipping over to from football to basketball, with Kevin Young right now, BYU splashing cash left, right, and center in basketball NIL. So hopefully that will translate over to the football realm. But they are embracing it. They're kind of realize, you know what, this is the way that the college sports are going. It's a professional model now, and I think that as things continue to progress, BYU may not be out on the kind of the front foot in terms of being the first team in the door and splashing the biggest bag of money at a guy, but they're going to be competitive. And they've got a nice NIL collective called the Royal Blue Collective that's sprung up now. It's got a lot of alumni working with it. So I think they're coming along similar to what you talk about Baylor. Like, they maybe weren't off to the best start with it, but I think they're making up ground very, very quickly.
And we've talked about, by the way, that's a good sign for Baylor, I think, because I think Baylor thought about it pretty similarly at different timelines, obviously, but that's good to hear from the Baylor standpoint. Now, I do want to ask, we've referenced the 2021 and 2022 games, that little mini series, home and home, two wildly entertaining games. I was actually there in Provo. It's one of the best games I've ever been to live. It was incredible, the atmosphere, and then the game itself was just unbelievable. So that said, is this something that BYU fans are looking forward to, having games like this again, two similar-minded schools, similar-minded programs, to have those guys on the schedule again?
I believe so. Here's the thing. BYU, they've had a lot of universities around the country that have looked down upon them with regards to their religious affiliation. Baylor, I think BYU looks at Baylor and says, you know what, that's a compatriot of ours. That is a university, it's religiously affiliated, that we absolutely get along with. And I think BYU and Baylor, they can build a pretty healthy rivalry. I really believe that. I know that Waco and Provo don't necessarily seem like natural places to have a rivalry spring up, but when you've got two religiously minded universities going head to head, I'm all for it. And that's the fun part about this, is I think that BYU fans that went down to Waco in 21, and obviously, as you mentioned, you came back here in 2022 to Provo to see that game. They were really, really good games. And so long as that continues, you have competitive matchups, that's how rivalries spring up. You still won from us, we still won from you. And that's the fun part about the games, especially when it comes to conference play, because they have an impact more overall in the conference race. But at the same time, individually, they have some really, really fun ramifications. So I do think that the Bears and the Cougars could have a really, really healthy rivalry coming here.
Passion, drive, patience, the things that win the friendly Fracas, is also the formula for what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, so much more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors is your own personal Pimp My Ride. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay's Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, you are not burning cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. So keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions do apply. That eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to our USA customers. And once again, that is ebaymotors.com. I think that's funny that there is so much like-mindedness, with different religions. That's not something we usually unite on,
Well,
right?
here's the thing, though. So BYU for years wanted to be in the Pac-12, and the Pac-12 thumbed their nose at them time and time again, and it bordered on religious discrimination. I'll use that frankly because it was not friendly in many respects. And BYU just, you know what? We're a good football program. We're not supposed to be part of this, but you know what? Now that in the Big 12, now that Baylor's there's other religiously affiliated universities across the country that BYU is happy to associate with. I think it's all good. And I think that, you mentioned the like-mindedness. I think both of these universities kind of understand what they're all about, what they're going up against, and they just kind of embrace who they are.
Yeah, and we were preparing for that. But when the Big 12 looked like it was going to disband when Texas OU left, we're looking at Pac-12, and that was the hot rumor. They're not going to take you. They think they're better than you. They're not going to take a religious school, and it's just kind of like the enemy of my enemy is my friend in a way. Like we know the crap that comes with this, that comes with the labels and whatever. So yeah, I'm glad that is something we can unite on. So I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit here because you've got the ultimate rival in the conference now. The big rival is there in the conference, but a lot of new opponents, new rivalries that are being born. Where do you think Baylor would fit in terms of, BYU's got Utah, we've got TCU, so it's not going to be either one's top rivalry. But do you think Baylor kind of fits in there somewhere near the top?
I do think so. Now it's going to take a little bit of time, I think, for it to build up because you have, like I said, you have those competitive games, and 21 and 22 did yield very, very good matchups. Now 24, if we have a good game down there in Waco again, that's awesome. I think it would start to build in that rivalry sense. BYU and TCU were in the Mountain West together and had some really, really epic battles before TCU left and BYU went independent. So there's already kind of a minor rivalry there, even though they haven't played in over a decade until this past season. But I do think that Baylor absolutely can be in the mix. And with TCU holding, I just call them TCU, but it's Texas Christian University. Like they have the religious connotation with them. I think between those three universities, you could build up a nice little kind of trio of quote unquote Christian schools that could be going back and forth with one another. So we'll see how it goes. But I do think just in terms of the fact that they are religiously affiliated schools, BYU and Baylor absolutely can lock in. Yes, it's going to be BYU and Utah. That's number one always. But I think that Baylor, if things continue to trend that they did those first two matchups in that non-conference slate, and I could see it very easily being one of those 2 or 3 rivalries that BYU fans always look forward to.
Yeah, and what's crazy is the overlap the last 3 years. I mean, we've gone through a bunch, right? Gerry Bohanon, the Barringtons, Jeff Grimes, Caleb Lohner on the basketball court, and now playing football. And you've got some more, I'm sure.
Eric Mateos.
Yes, there you go.
At Waco, and Eric worked at BYU, and I got to know Eric very well when he was at BYU. So yeah, there's a lot of connections between these universities, and that alone, I think, can help kind of build a relationship between the two.
Yeah, we felt like we dodged a bullet in the Kentucky basketball head coaching search, and it comes for some of us, right? So it's just crazy the overlap that has been there just the last few years. So I think it's like some higher power is forcing these two to have something of a rivalry. So I can't wait for that game this year. Jake, I usually try to get a positive note. I try to anyway at the end of these things. So I asked you earlier about what has changed for the better for BYU, a position group or whatever that you think has gotten stronger. What do you think hasn't changed or maybe even gotten weaker about this team that gives you pause for concern?
Biggest concern for me is their defensive line. Now, a year ago, BYU had a wholesale change on the defensive staff. They brought in Jay Hill to be the defensive coordinator, and the metrics last year for BYU, numbers don't lie, and they were awful defensively. We're talking like sub 100 in a lot of major categories on defense. They were the worst sack team in the Power 5 ranks last year. So there's a lot of work to be done, particularly on the defensive front for BYU. The concern I have is I just don't see the guys that would make a difference on this roster. They brought a lot of the guys back from last year's team, hoping that continuity and development would pay off. I'm still concerned. When you have the likes of Ollie Gordon, the other running backs in the Big 12, you have guys like Daquan Finn for you guys down there at Baylor, as well as a bevy of other great quarterbacks in this league. BYU's got to prove that A, they can stop the run, and B, also get some pressure on the quarterback. And until I see progress from the guys out there on that defensive front, I'm going to withhold judgment, but I am concerned about the defensive front and their ability to hold up against Big 12 competition.
Man, that could be fun. The least sacks in the Power 5, the most sacks allowed in the Big 12 last year on Baylor's side. That could be just what the Bears need to get the run game going. We'll see. Jake, I want to ask before we get you out of here, you had said bowl game feels like it's got to happen this year after the last 2 seasons and how they've gone. What do you see as the ceiling for this team? And if it all goes well, how well could it go?
I think that the ceiling for me would be like 9-3 at the very, very best. BYU's got a really, really tough schedule. They face essentially the top 5 teams in the preseason poll, and it's going to be a really tough slate of games, I think, for BYU. So yeah, let's say they get steady quarterback play, if not star quality quarterback play. I think they top out at 9-3, but I've said it on my podcast multiple times. Get to 6-6. Anything beyond that at this point, I think, would be gravy for this season, and show you're more competitive and start to build from there. I think BYU fans are under no illusions that they're going to come in here to the Big 12 and be one of the heavy hitters early on in their tenure, but they want to see progress. So I think if you get to 6-6, get to bowl eligibility, and maybe pick up an extra win along the way, go to 7-5, I think that'd be a good sign for this Cougar program.
Jake Hatch, Locked On Cougars. Jake, how can people find your work both in Locked On to, comment if Baylor wins the game in September, find the comment section, and your radio show as well?
Yeah, so I work for the KSL Sports Zone in Salt Lake City. I'm our pre- and post-game host, actually, for BYU games. So if you want to get some insight on that, we'll be doing that on 97.5, the KSL Sports Zone in Salt Lake City. I do Locked On Cougars, covering all things BYU every single day as well, just like this show. Find it on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter under our handle Locked On Cougars. It's also on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. Hop aboard. It's going to be a really, really fun season ahead. I know that we've got a lot of good shows across the Big 12 when it comes to the Locked On Network. And the best part is we're going to have a lot of interaction amongst all of these different shows.
Yes. And this is how you keep up with Gerry Bohanon's career, Bears. Okay. This is how you do it. Jake's got us covered.
If you want updates on him, please, by all means, check out Locked On Cougars.
Oh, we definitely do. Jake, thanks so much for coming on. Really appreciate you taking the time.
Absolutely. Anytime you need me.